right, I'm Siobhan Senior from the English department. Thank you all for being here. I get to run the first Friday speaker series this year, which means I get to invite people I want to hear. So the first person I invited was Theri Pickens, who's an assistant professor in the English department up at Bates College, and she did a PhD in Comp Lit at UCLA, and she's published a ton. She's a creative writer as well as a scholar in disability studies. She's published a ton of great essays, including a fabulous one on Audre Lorde in a collection called Blackness and Disability, which I can't say enough about that book. That book rocked my world so hard that, that I was prompted to put together a collection on indigeneity and disability. So she's really, Theri's really at the intersection of critical ethnic studies and disability studies, fields that are just starting to talk to each other in really exciting and productive ways. And she has a book project in the works called Political Flesh, Narrating Black and Arab Embodied Experience in the Contemporary United States. And basically, we're so tickled to have you here, Theri. And I'm going to be tweeting this talk. If anybody, she's already announced it on Twitter. And she did it from TweetDeck. She launched it from TweetDeck. So I'm going to be tweeting the talk. If anybody wants to tweet, we're tweeting under hashtag UNH, hashtag First Fridays. So welcome, Theri Pickens.
And just as a housekeeping item, for the purposes of access and inclusion, we have a sign interpreter, and for those of you who would like to follow along, several copies of the talk in 16-point font in case you have visual impairments or in case you feel like you need to follow along. These are not for circulation though, so please return them at the end of the event. Access and inclusion is something we have not just for those who need it, but for everyone to understand that it's something we are committed to as scholars and as part of the institution. So I just want to say that as a small housekeeping item before we begin. And I'm about to say first, but this isn't really first, because I've already said a couple of things. I want to thank Siobhan Senior for inviting me to come and share my work in this industry, and I do mean industry because the Academy is an industry. It's such a boon to have people to take an interest in your ideas, and I'm really very grateful that she's invited me here to share with you all. And second, I'd also like to thank my wonderful colleague and friend, Dr. Courtney Marshall, for her encouragement and her support. Friends are, despite the count on Facebook, a rare and beautiful thing, and I'm especially blessed to have one of such a high caliber, both as a scholar and as a friend. And last but not least, I'd like to thank the administrative staff, Jen Doobie, our sign interpreter, custodial staff, and affiliated sponsors, because there's so many people whose intellectual work and physical labor gets overlooked when we do projects like this within the institution. So I'd like to recognize them, and can we give them just a round of applause in their absence? This talk is less a fully formed idea or theory and more of an opening, kind of a beginning of a conversation, if you will. I came to these ideas through Black speculative fiction, specifically Octavia Butler's final novel, Fledgling, which she completed before she passed. And it's with this novel that I'll begin, but as you will see, some of my musings here have wide-reaching application beyond the book, beyond the genre of Black speculative fiction, and beyond even the field, I think, of literary studies. And I appreciate all of your comments and questions, and I mean that sincerely. And for that reason, I'll try to keep my remarks pretty brief. She awakens in pain so severe she can barely open her eyes. In touching her head, she finds that her skull feels soft in two places. She smells the dankness of the cave she is in and the lush greenery of the forest outside it. She sleeps. Upon awakening, she finds a part of her skull has healed and her vision has cleared, but she craves meat. As she hunts several deer and eats them, she happens upon a burned out village that feels eerily familiar. After a few days, she explores the surrounding area. She knows nothing of herself, of her origins, or her world. A stranger picks her up, and through him she finds out that she is a young, Black vampire. The stranger, a 20-something-year-old white man named Wright, becomes one of her human companions, or symbionts. He helps her learn her name, Shori, and eventually they meet her father. Shori learns that she's part of a vampiric race called Ina. Her female family has been massacred by unknown assailants. She is dark skinned because she is the result of genetic experiments combining human and Ina blood that allow Ina to walk in daylight hours. Shortly thereafter, Shori's father and his community of Ina, including Shori's brother Stefan, and their symbionts are killed. 2 surviving symbionts from her father's community join Shori and help her fend off yet a 3rd attack. As Shori must protect and learn from them, she finds herself frustrated by her amnesia. Shori and her new symbionts find another Ina family, the Gordons, where they are attacked for a 4th time. In each encounter with other Ina, Shori learns more about the stigma of her human blood and dark skin. In the courtroom drama that follows, Shori confronts her attackers and their allies in a space where the rhetoric is just as dangerous as the prospect of murder is imminent. The Gordons host a council of judgment, which according to Ina cultural protocol, determines the truth and the consequences thereof. The accused family, the Silks, enlist their advocates, the Dahlman family, and allies to defend themselves. However, their defense does not consist of facts, which in the Ina community are determined by events and by what Ina experienced with their heightened 5 senses. But the Silk defense also includes rhetoric that denigrates Shori based on her race and her abilities. Shori must match and overcome their use of rhetoric to successfully argue her case and stay alive. Shori is a young, black, female Ina. For her enemies, her ontological identity serves as prima facie evidence of her abnormality. But her amnesia becomes the vehicle through which they articulate their thinly veiled disgust for her. It is their animus that drives the accusations that deny her an identity, question her sanity, label her sexually deviant, and cast her as fundamentally dangerous. In examining this text, I kept returning to several ideas. This protagonist, Shori, has to combat assailants who are not only physically violent, with malicious intent, but who also mobilize dangerous discourse to deny her justice. What does it mean to have social justice for people whose lives are so determined by rhetoric made real? What does it mean to have social justice for people whose lives are so determined by rhetoric made real? Within this dangerous fiction, impairment becomes the justification for denying Shori justice. Yet in that courtroom, Shori mobilizes her understanding of social and cultural cues, her heightened innocences, and her ability to reason to mount a defense. Her behavior prompts the question most adroitly asked by Margaret Price. If you are crazy, can you still be of sound mind? That is, how does one who is considered crazy operate while bound by the ramifications of the rhetoric thrown at them? It is this question with which I am primarily concerned today because it's all about perception and behavior. I want to know how Shori as a character and who she represents as an archetype finds and uses the radical potential of her own subjectivity in such a hostile environment. Professor Kimberly Crenshaw's theory of intersectionality becomes rather apropos in thinking about how people understand multiple parts of an identity. According to her, identity is not additive, such that Chinese plus woman plus working class equals one person. Instead, one's Chineseness interacts with one's womanhood, which interacts with one's working class identity, such that all three, and sometimes more, are at stake at all times. There's a simultaneity there. There's a significance of presence there that's interlocking rather than merely, kind of set of boxes one checks. The metaphor of intersection makes sense here as it forces us to think through how Shori's blackness and womanhood and amnesia conflict or dovetail with one another. Yet there is an intellectual productivity in considering what happens at that intersection and what it looks like. Within the logic of the metaphor, we can cross intersections, we can wait at intersections, or find clarity there. But we can also get run over at intersections by someone driving down the same street as us. Women run over each other all the time. Men do too. In addition, we have to consider what kind of intersection we're at. Are we at a T-stop, for instance? Are there dead ends ahead? Are we expected to bear left 500 yards, right? Is this like one of those Boston intersections where there's a whole bunch of one-ways coming at us all at once? And have we met up with something familiar to most of us in here in New England, the roundabout? And all jocularity aside, I offer these scenarios as a way to examine how rhetorics of oppression work and how one might, to borrow another driving metaphor, get around them. After all, Shori must navigate that intersection differently depending on how she's attacked. I want to take a moment to parse two instances in which Shori is attacked at the Council of Judgment and then examine how she responds. The first one, before I begin with that, I have two terms that I want to clarify. I do not use impairment and disability interchangeably. They're very particular terms. Impairment refers to a material reality, in this case, her amnesia. Disability refers to the social, legal, and other institutional structures that make one's impairment an issue. And to use an example, one who uses a wheelchair has an impairment. It's only when that person encounters stairs that they become disabled. So just again, impairment is a material reality like amnesia or the necessity of using a wheelchair. Disability is a social, legal, and institutional structure, including a cultural structure, that makes one impairment an issue. So it's not the wheelchair that's the impairment, it's the stairs that create disability. Historically, conceptualizing Blackness as impairment allows one to rhetorically create and fix the relationships between blacks and whites as unequal, seemingly ad infinitum. Within the world of fledgling, the Silks configure Shori's Blackness as impairment as well, demonstrating that, quote, race and disability are not separate, but rather deeply associated and mutually enforced. To prove that Shori is not Ina, the Silks and the Domins manipulate racist and ableist discourses to their advantage. For instance, racist discourse can fill in the gaps for ableism, justifying oppression when one set of ideas becomes insufficient at doing so. What Shori realizes is that when a categorization of her identity does not serve their purpose, the Domins and the Silks can foreground another portion that does. Shori observes Catherine Dalman, quote, she believed that I would either lose control and disgrace myself before the council, possibly by attacking her, or if I didn't, she could use my apparent lack of feeling to point out how un-Ina I was. She won either way. Now, either Shori is not Ina enough to understand the goings-on of the council because she's black, or she's not Ina enough to remember because she has amnesia. The classification of Shori as Ina depends as much upon her race as it does upon their disabling actions. If they're both understood as deficiencies, both draw her Ina identity into question. Though I would agree that race and disability mutually reinforce each other, in this instance, the reinforcement takes the form of competition. Neither the racist claims nor the claims arising out of ableism can be true simultaneously because they contradict each other. The strategy of deploying them subsequent to each other undoes the work of justifying the Silks and the Domins positions, since Shori cannot be both Ina and not Ina, able and not able. During the Council of Judgment, Russell Silk mobilizes racist rhetoric subsequent to failed ableist rhetoric. He questioned Shori's behavior with regard to her mate. That's a little bit of Ina biology for you. Ina typically find mates for their young so that a group of brothers will mate with a group of sisters. To mate, an Ina female binds herself to a male Ina by biting him. With her venom inside him, the male Ina comes to need his mate and is infertile with other female Ina. During the binding process, the Ina male must, much like a symbiont or human companion, comes to smell like his female mate and must obey his female Ina. Prior to the massacre of her families, Shori and her sisters were betrothed to mate with Daniel Gordon and his brothers. Now, the reason they had not yet mated is because according to Ina cultural custom and biology, Shori is not yet an adult. She actually looks to be about 11 years old, but in Ina reality, she's about 53 or 57, something weird like that. When Russell Silk questions Daniel about what Daniel saw and experienced while under attack at the Gordon family compound, Daniel denies that Shori has bound him to her. Russell Silk contests this assertion, implying that she has shown a disregard for other Ina. Russell's contestation charges that Shori is too dangerous to other Ina by virtue of not being fully Ina herself. His assertion of incapability rests on Shori's memory loss, configuring her lack of knowledge about Ina cultural custom as wedded to her ontology rather than a set of missing facts. To ascertain the truth, other Ina smell Daniel and conclude that he is not bound. Now, this scene is actually really cinematic because you can see, at least through the text, the way that all the other Ina are sitting there going, he's not bound. He's not bound, right? Like it's very much about their ability to smell and understand that he's not actually yet had sex with her or mated with her. But once they finish with their olfactory moment, it becomes clear that Shori has not demonstrated a regard for other Ina. Russell Silk tries another tactic. He then implies that her scent in her betrothal is manipulative. His second tactic imagines a Shori that is completely opposed to the one he first constructs. The second Shori is so fully capable of being Ina that she cunningly manipulates Daniel Gordon in an attempt to sway the council. Here, Russell Silk obliquely references black female hypersexuality, specifically the Jezebel archetype, who indiscriminately lures men to her bed based on their prospective value. Drawing on Jezebel depicts Shori as dangerous, and Russell attempts to solidify his point by asking Daniel whether Daniel is sure of why he believes Shori's account of events. Russell's question suggests that Shori wields a masterful deceit, since she must thoroughly know Ina biology and cultural custom to have deliberately seduced Daniel. The corollary of Russell's thought is also that Shori is faking her amnesia. His second Shori is fully incompatible with his first. According to the constructed Shoris of Russell Silk's imagination, and I use that phrase deliberately, the constructed Shoris of Russell Silk's imagination, Shori is both not Ina and too Ina, unable and too able. Neither allows for the possibility that her actions are driven by thoughtfulness as well as instinct. Yet the fact that she is not bound Daniel to her suggests that she is Ina enough to want him and intelligent enough to resist. She is able enough to bind him and ethical enough to resist. Shori quickly learns that she is, quote, physically more powerful than any one of her enemies, but she is no match for their collective bigotry. She can fight off violence, but she cannot change the attitudes of those behind it. Her only defense is to be ethical and honest. As she tells Hayden Gordon, quote, I haven't felt inclined to tell lies. So far my problem is ignorance, not dishonesty. Shori tells the truth and remains a, quote, weirdly ethical little thing, end quote, based on her need for survival. To be manipulative or dishonest would jeopardize not only a favorable council decision, but also her life. In order to survive, she must amass symbionts, secure allies, retain the agreement to mate with the Gordons, and learn about Ina custom. Her resolve to be circumspect saves her from Russell Silk's accusations and buttresses the truth of her story. As one Ina council member concludes, quote, the questions she's asked, questions that were answered again and again with lies and misdirection, were good, sensible questions. The questions she answered honestly, end quote. Though it is clear that at least 4 Ina families will not be her allies, Shori secures through her honesty the goodwill of those who stand with her against the Silks and the Dolmans, enabling her to survive. Elsewhere, Shori's honesty and forthright questioning presents challenges to her allies because she forces them to confront their own relationship to the systems that work within Ina culture. Part of the textured nature of the novel, and indeed Butler's oeuvre more generally, is that the aggressors are not the only characters enmeshed in ableist or racist ideology. The allies are as well. And the Gordon family demonstrates a remarkable investment in able-bodied privilege. Much like white privilege, which persists and proliferates because it has been normalized and invisibilized, able-bodied privilege, sometimes referred to as abled privilege, refers to a set of unasked for advantages given to the able-bodied based on cultural custom, social mores, and institutional structures. And I might pause here and note that we're having this in the MUB instead of in the English department because the English department is not actually accessible here. So there's a very real point at which this becomes real for all of us. In fledgling, it takes the form of coercive verbal and nonverbal cues that isolate Shori by shunting aside the presence of impairment and disability in Ina society. The Gordons understand Shori's worth as one who can function during daylight hours, but undermine their own interests when they question her competence as an Ina. Specifically, they deploy an evaluative gaze that attempts to assess her fitness based on their own criteria, steeped as it is in able-bodied privilege. When Shori interacts with the Gordon family, she's very much aware that she's being observed and speculated upon. When she first enters their compound, for instance, she's aware of the smell of guns and gunpowder because they're pointed at her. While interrogating one of the human assassins who was responsible for the fourth attack, she notes, quote, "I suppose that I was as much on trial as Victor was, but in a different way. What did I remember? How well did I compensate for what I didn't remember?" End quote. As acute as Ina's sensory perception is, the Gordons' gaze vis-a-vis Shori is fundamentally flawed because it presumes no distinction between impairment and disability. The logic of their gaze becomes more clear when the Gordons must explain what they know about the coming days before the Council of Judgment convenes. The Gordons draw little distinction between her condition as impairment and a lack of information given by them as disabling or disability. They know that they know that the aggressors will not initiate another attack because, as Hayden tells her, Shori would be allowed to execute them by inviting them and commanding them to take their own lives. The other elder father, Preston, demonstrates a significant frustration at giving her this information. The disagreement between the two elder fathers arises from the same logic, namely that they know better than she does what her condition requires, and that their understanding of her is complete without her input. They fail to contextualize Shori's amnesia as comparable, though not equal, to their own inability to walk in the daylight. Instead, they configure her amnesia as inherent flaw, rather than draw from their own nocturnal life as a faulty but useful analogy for understanding her impairment. Their presumption of their own fitness endangers them and Shori. Without the knowledge regarding her venom's potency, Shori could inadvertently endanger one of her potential mates and sabotage the council proceedings, and she's actually later accused of doing so, as we just noted. Much like her honesty with others, the Gordons' honesty with her also protects their investment in her as a mate. With the information about her venom, Shori is no longer disabled, but can decide how she ought to behave given the facts of her own impairment and Ina's social custom. As a consequence of their investment in their own abled privilege, the Gordons are also slow to recognize the advantages of Shori's memory loss. Shori consistently reminds them of the distinction between her impairment and her need for information. She says, quote, "My memory goes back a few weeks and no further. I ask because I don't know, and I don't want to make assumptions about anything this important," end quote. It is unlikely that the Ina forget she has amnesia because they themselves have long memories, but they appear to consistently think of it as a lack. Shori has to refocus them by participating in a repeated coming out discourse. Quote, constructing a specific narrative explaining her mind to a skeptical, ignorant, and somewhat hostile audience, end quote. Consequently, she disrupts the narrative that undergirds their distrust of her by emphasizing her ability to reason and strategically plan. Her experience prior to reaching the Gordon family compound bears out that her instincts and meager knowledge functions as a boon, making her an excellent strategist, if not a salvific figure. She quite literally saves them from an attempted murder and has the potential to pass on valuable genetic material to her progeny so that they can gain the day. Shori's insistence on her impairment as real and her impairment as material forces them to change the way they understand disability as culturally constructed. Ethical behavior and forthright honesty do not seem to be likely strategies, especially when others are not playing by the rules. The Silks rely on their age. One is about 6 centuries old, I believe, and their relationships with council members, which, as you can imagine, if someone is 600 years old, they've got pretty strong relationships with everyone around them, or at least ones that are long. I don't know if they're all strong relationships. And the Dahlmans leverage their understanding of Ina pride to work against Shori. Quite frankly, their tactics work because 4 Ina families side with one or both of them at the conclusion of the council proceedings, citing Shori's amnesia as rationale and turning her impairment once again into disability. One says, quote, "I can't condemn the Silks as a family because of what one seriously impaired child believes," end quote. Another, "Shori Matthews is much too impaired to be permitted to speak against other Ina. How can we destroy people's lives, even kill them on the word of a child whose mind has been all but destroyed and who, even if she were healthy, is barely Ina at all," end quote. A third, "I do not believe Shori's memories and accusations should be trusted. I'm not convinced that Shori understands the situation as well as she believes she does. She believes what she says, that's clear, but I'm not willing to disrupt or destroy the Silk family on the word of someone as disabled as Shori Matthews clearly is," end quote. The fourth, "I stand with the Silks and with Catherine. I don't want to. I believe the Silks may have murdered Shori's family. It's certainly possible. And Catherine may have sent her symbiont after Shori's symbiont. But I cannot in good conscience base such a judgment on the words of someone as disabled as Shori is," end quote. I want to let that sit for a minute because all of those should sound fairly familiar to all of us. I just want to kind of sit with that for a little bit because those 4 moments are so reminiscent and so analogous to what happens when we're dealing with social justice and disability, or social justice and race, or some sort of confluence of the two. I want to just kind of let that marinate as a whole. Their rationale hinges on the idea that Shori's honesty is simply not enough. In short, the radical political potential of ethical behavior as an antidote to racism, sexism, and ableism remains stymied by others' belief in the illogic of those rhetorics at work. I won't go so far as to say that this moots Shori's choice to be ethical as a radical political response, but it does bring us back to one of the central questions I asked at the beginning of the talk. What does it mean to have social justice for people whose lives are so determined, perhaps even over-determined, by rhetoric made real? By way of partial answer, I take my cue from Barbara Christian, the Black feminist scholar who promulgated the idea that people of color, quote, people of color theorize, quote, in narrative forms, in the stories we create, in riddles and proverbs, in the play with language because dynamic rather than fixed ideas seem more to our liking, end quote. Honesty and straightforward ethical responses to injustice and pain have been a consistent strategy for Black women regardless of disability and political persuasion. We deploy them in an effort to ensure that the archive does not eclipse or bury or shunt aside the narrative that best describes their or our version of events. It is part of the dynamic tradition of speaking truth to power, agitating from the outside, and fomenting a radical politics in the face of what seems to be certain destruction. In the tradition of James Baldwin, I call out my dead and wounded sisters as a way to enact my own, to use an appropriate phrase, litany for survival. Audre Lorde, Claudia Tate, Barbara Christian, Harriet Tubman, Daphne Brooks, Harriet Jacobs, Ida B. Wells Barnett, Anna Julia Cooper, Fannie Lou Hamer, Caretha Mitchell, Alice Dunbar Nelson, Imani Perry, Melissa